You are now listening to EdYOUcate, the most fired up educational podcast there is. EdYOUcate is all about the quality education access to students and how we can provide research-based solutions to free the young minds of the world. On this podcast, we will be exploring different educational experiences, education's greatest of debates, and more. The hottest educational podcast out. EdYOUcate is brought to you from the Albany State University's very own Center for Educational Opportunity. Enjoy.
Today we have our special guest, Woldeyhannes, and we will be discussing the topic of activism, education equity, racial justice, and coalition building. Would you like to introduce yourself to the listeners and what you do and just who you are?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that warm introduction. My name is Woldeyhannes, and I am just so honored to be here today. I wear a lot of hats, but I think the hat that will always fit me is the hat of an educator. I started off in my professional career as an educator with Teach for America, and the work that I do right now is directly correlated with supporting educators, specifically Black educators. I started off as a teacher in San Antonio. So I'm originally from Texas. So San Antonio definitely has a special place in my heart for a variety of reasons. But I did get a chance to work with 4th and 5th grade students there. And then I also taught for an additional year in Dallas, in my hometown, at a charter school, and I taught 5th grade science. So I'm a STEM educator and a proud one at that. And then I eventually made my way to DC because, that's where our nation's policies are made. And I was very interested in exploring the policy world, specifically the education policy world. So I came out here to attend American University. And while I was at school, I got an opportunity to work with an education advocacy organization called 50CAN, and they introduced me to the world of advocacy. I've always done advocacy work. I just never knew I was doing it throughout, my high school experience and specifically in college, where I was really so much more active in like social justice and human rights issues. I didn't realize I was doing advocacy work, but that's exactly what it was. And I was able to really, pinpoint it throughout my time at 50CAN. And then I got some experience working in the education media sector. I was working at the 74 for a few years, and that really expanded my horizons on, what it means to change the narrative in not just the, your respective industries, but in education. Right now, there are too many confusing narratives going on in the education sector. And this is kind of the reason why it's all over the place. And that's probably what it seems like for a lot of people. But really and truly, we have to do better for our kids. We have to do better because they're not getting the educational experiences that they deserve. Their communities are not seeing it, and their families are not seeing it. And, that's frankly why I'm doing the work that I'm doing today. And now I'm joining you on behalf of the Center for Black Educator Development, which is where I currently am as their director for strategic partnerships. So sorry for that long intro, but...
It's okay. Thank you for that. So I would like to start off by just asking you, why did you choose education? What is it about education that just captivated your heart to want to join and participate in changing the lives of young children?
I ask myself that every day, to be quite honest, but I go back to my why. And so I remember when I was in 4th grade, my 4th grade teacher told me, once I expressed to her that I really wanted to be a teacher, I admired her, and she really helped make my 4th and 5th grade experiences so stellar. She actually moved up with us. So I was intrigued by that. I adored her. And I was like, I think I want to become a teacher when I grow up. And she's like, don't do it. We don't get paid enough. She wasn't lying, and she still isn't lying. That's a sad, sad truth. However, when I was in college, I was, like I said, very active in all sorts of causes. I was involved in the Black student associations on my campus. I joined a sorority, and I was very active in this campaign called the V-Day campaign that raised awareness around reproductive rights and also gender-based violence. So I was like, what? All of this stuff around social justice issues is definitely something that intrigues me. And I'm also interested to see what type of influence it could potentially have on the generations to come. So I started working at this organization called Generation Hope my senior year of college. It was a great way to make extra money. And it was an after school program where I got a chance to work with some youth. And it was one of the best experiences of my life. The students truly enjoyed being there. We got a chance to explore so many creative avenues, specifically in the STEM world. And that was kind of like my first introduction to what my life could look like as a teacher. So once I finished up that experience, I started to apply for Teach for America. They were recruiting heavily on my campus. And I was like, sure, this sounds like it's for me. I got accepted and I was set. I was like, great. I'm not like some of my peers that are still trying to figure out next steps. I know exactly what I'm going to do and when I'm going to do it, and I'm just ready. So a few months, go into being trained and whatnot. And then I ended up joining, like I said, the Teach for America Corps in San Antonio in 2013. When I started teaching for real, in a full-time capacity, it was one of the most fulfilling experiences of my entire life. And I always say, like, if I could do anything, I would probably go back and work as a classroom teacher, because kids teach you so much. You learn a lot about yourself, but like, you are honestly a mirror for students and for any young student in your life too. And I really appreciated that awareness that they brought to me, but I also appreciated the way that they embraced me as a part of their own family, their own community. Like, I had no familiarity with San Antonio, but I was immediately embraced. And I know that doesn't happen for everybody, but that was definitely the things that truly melted my heart for a lot of reasons. And it made me fall in love with them, with their communities, not so much the profession, because the profession itself is, we know it can be problematic, and it's the systems, it's the adults that make it complex. But my students have always been my why. They've always kept me grounded. They made me realize that, the systems may be wacky, and they're always going to continue to be wacky and not serve those that it's intended to serve. However, the love that you have, for the compassion that you have for your students is that's what kept me going. And so, yeah, I always just try and ground myself in that. Anytime I'm feeling distressed or annoyed, frustrated, and this industry can definitely do that to you, I think about what brought me to this work in the first place, and it was my students.
Oh, wow. What grade level did you teach?
So whenever I was working with students in college, I taught 6th grade. And then I taught officially at 4th grade my first year, and I moved up with my students, just like my teacher moved up with me and my peers whenever I was in elementary school. And then after that, like, I just started working in churches for like vacation Bible schools. I was like teaching like 3rd through 6th grade and in that context too. So that's like my happy medium, like anywhere between the 3rd through 6th grade grade levels.
Yes. As you were talking, I was just thinking about how you had many different experiences in, service, whether you were in high school or whether you were in college, that prepared you for where you are now. And so I just wanted to ask, how did those organizations that you were involved with, how did it help you implement just structural tools or tools that help you focus on the holistic perspective of a child in the classroom and not just academic wise?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I mean, frankly, I feel like there's, how they say, like, you're never really ready to be a parent. I think the same thing applies to being a teacher sometimes too. I felt like I was discovering, honestly, it was kind of like building the plane as you're flying it type of situation. And I know some people really hate that analogy, but that's what it felt like for me working with students at first, because it does take time. And part of most of teaching is all about relationship building. So once you get a chance to truly understand, where students are coming from, like where their families are coming from, and why they believe what they believe, and what their perceptions are about certain things, as it pertains to education, that really helps you to find a way to meet them where they're at. But whether that's academically, whether that's emotionally, and so thinking about relationship building, thankfully I had smaller classes. So I had about like 25 to 30 students, which is considered small. And I know that's sad, but I had about 25 to 30 students. And it was easy for me to really build authentic relationships with them. And that meant like sometimes pulling them aside and having lunch with one or two of them. Or, if their parents and their family members were okay with it, like maybe doing some sort of like Saturday activity with them. And this is honestly, and I used to use that as incentives too, because, they loved, whether or not they'll I'll admit it. Maybe when they get older, they may not like it as much, but students loved hanging out with teachers, especially outside of the workday. They were so excited. And I was like, yeah, when I was teaching in Dallas, I offered some of my students an opportunity for them to come to a baseball game at my alma mater, TCU. And they were students that were very, academically, they were doing so well. They loved sports, and they were just like, yes, I'm down. I'm going to do whatever I need to do to be able to go with Miss W to watch a baseball game at TCU. And it's like those types of things. Like it truly made up my entire, my entire year. Whenever I was teaching, it was like I was doing that nonstop. And I understand, that's probably not healthy for a variety of reasons, but they honestly were a part of my life. Like whenever I went home, I was constantly doing stuff for school, and it was hard to find breaks. And I'm very intentional about breaks and boundaries now, but back then I was like, it's fine. I can do this. It's sustainable. So yeah, I hope that answered the question.
It did. Thank you. It did. So I just wanted to ask you also, what is your viewpoint or perspective of education equity and access to opportunities?
So education equity to me really spans over a variety of subjects, but really and truly, I just think about representation, right? That is one thing that, especially the work that I'm doing right now, is all about increasing teacher diversity. And I thought about my own experiences in schools. I didn't have a lot of teachers that looked like me. In college, the same thing. I think I may have had maybe one Black professor in undergrad, and I know I had 3 in grad school, which was unheard of for a lot of people, I'm sure. But that to me, obviously there is a problem, right? We know that the student population is growing more increasingly diverse over the years. I think the stats show by 2040 or 2050, students of color are going to make up the majority in our nation. And, our teacher diversity, our teacher workforce right now does not reflect that. We have less than 20% of our teachers in public schools right now that make up teachers of color, right? And that's not anywhere near where they need to be. And I think when I think about education equity, I want to make sure that students have representation, have those people in the classroom that can relate to some of their experiences and that can see them for who they are and not what types of grades they'll be able to produce and what they can do for the school systems. But they need people in the classroom that will see them and value them no matter what they're bringing to the classroom, right? In our work, we like to say that students need both windows and mirrors. The reason why we don't see a lot of people pursuing teaching is because they may have had negative experiences in their K through 12 experience. And they're like, I don't want no parts of the education system. I'm good. But the reality is that we can change that narrative. Once again, like I said, narratives in education matter. And this is one of them. Why are we not portraying teaching as a viable option for young students? Like myself, I was someone who was intrigued, but immediately I was told, we don't get paid enough. So at that point, I'm setting my mind on a profession that is going to value me and respect me and pay me what I'm worth. But as Black women, we know that is a struggle, a never-ending struggle, unfortunately. However, I think, in this work of improving teacher diversity, we have to be diligent. We have to know that it doesn't start at, when you start recruiting teachers from colleges and try and get them into these, teacher prep programs or alternative certification programs. It starts at the K through 12 level. What are you doing to instill a love for learning in your students? What are you doing to instill love for education, period? And if you can continue to sustain that love, then you'll see more students of color going into the teaching profession. But that is not the reality right now. And so that's what I think we need to do. And opportunities, go hand in hand. Why are we not exposing our students to additional opportunities outside of, what we're constantly telling our students about, you can become a lawyer or a doctor or an engineer? That's definitely, my parents are African. That's what I was told, that those were the only careers that were an option to me. However, why are we not showing people that, yes, teaching is an absolutely viable profession and it's respectable. It's definitely respected across the world. You can definitely become a producer. You can do all these things and you can dream big, but those dreams die so early on. And we have to do a better job of showing and providing kids the opportunities that they deserve. And that that doesn't mean that they have to be in this one size fits all education system either, but that's another topic for another day.
I like how you mentioned the negative notion or the negative myths of teaching and being a teacher. I remember I'm an education major as well, and
Awesome.
I remember telling one teacher that I wanted to go into teaching middle schoolers. And it was just like, oh, well, I'll pray for you or good luck. And it's just like, why does it have to be a good luck and it's sometimes, most of the time I see that it's a lot of the ones that are in the field already, like you said, that will give you advice, or not so much advice, but just allow you to have that lingering thought of there's negativity attached to teaching.
Yeah.
And you're right, it does start in K through 12, because you might have teachers that have been in the field for long enough, and they feel like they're not even being treated, right. And so then you have someone else that's excited that, wants to go into teaching with all these aspirations and, just full of just a burst of energy. And you hear a vet teacher tell you that they don't get paid that much, or good luck into this. And it's kind of like, it just makes you feel like, well, is it worth it? So
Yeah.
I think that it's two parts. Teachers have to play their part with encouraging not only the students through love, but also encouraging the ones that are interested in it and not just always thinking about the negative. So I'm so glad that you mentioned that.
Yeah. And it's also like, well, if we don't do it, who's going to do it? Right. Like,
Exactly.
if not me, like, are you going to put another, and no offense, because there are some really amazing white teachers that I've had personally that I know, but are you just going to put another white person in that place where we could have filled that position with, a person of color that could have been more reflective of the students that they're teaching? And so I just think about, if you don't want me to teach, then like, who else do you expect is going to do the job? Because you're going to send your kids to school. At the end of the day, you have to by law. And what school you choose is completely up to you. You have the choice and the autonomy, but you have to be thinking about who is in front of your kids, because they're going to be exposed to that person a majority of the week, a majority of the month, of the year. So that's how we should also be thinking about it. I'm not a parent, but I think about these all the time as a future parent too.
That is so true. And I'm so glad that you also mentioned parents. We know the importance of having representation in the classroom, but for our parent listeners, what are some of the things that can affect, or what are some ways that students of color specifically, can be affected while not having that representation in the classroom? Like, what are some things that parents can do to make sure that they look out for the signs? So I guess I'm asking, if there's a child that is not seeing themselves in the classroom and they're not performing well academically, how can that affect a child? Like, how can not having that representation affect a child for a parent that may not know anything about representation?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are having these conversations right now, both, from parents to school board members to policymakers at all levels, really. But they're having this conversation around CRT. And I don't think that we're talking enough about culturally relevant teaching either, right? Like, that is important. And teachers of color are well equipped to do that, provide that type of instruction for their kids that need it. Because if you're not grounding it in, once again, their culture, their background, their personal experiences, if you're not grounding those lessons, then you've already lost them. Like, I just remember thinking about, all the times, even when I was a student or when I was teaching, like, we would get curriculum that was very just like unseasoned, boring, like irrelevant to my students. And they're looking at these questions like, man, I've never had this experience. I've never been to the beach. I don't know how to solve this problem that has like the context of a beach in it. Or, like, I don't have access to this, but why are we not meeting them where they're at? Once again, right? Like, kids can learn. They have all the potential. Their minds are, like, so well equipped to take this in. It's just, unfortunately, they're not being centered in the school system, in the curriculum, in the pedagogy that's happening. But we have some data at the center that we like to share with some folks because it is very powerful. And the one example that I can share with you is when students have access to at least one Black teacher early on, it reduces specifically Black students' likelihood of dropping out of school by 39%. That is huge. And when they have more than one Black teacher, they're 32% more likely to go to college. So think about like those percentages, like they're less likely to drop out, they're more likely to go to college. And, some may say like college isn't for everybody, whatever, but if you provide them with the access to that opportunity, why can't it be for everybody? So I think when parents listen, or the parents that are listening, when they hear this data, that should move them to think about who is in front of my child and what are they teaching them? What are they inspiring them? What are some of their biases that they may not be aware of, but need to acknowledge to teach my child appropriately and also in the manner that they need? Because once again, like I said, this one size fits all system, the curricula or stuff like that, it's not going to work for our kids. And this is why it requires us to be creative, to work collaboratively, to share resources, to work with the community and the family, to really think, like come up with, okay, let's develop a strategic plan to get your kids to where they need to be, period.
Right. That's it. That's all. That is so true. So I love how you mentioned CRT, and I know that's a really big buzzword going around now, especially in the education field. But I also wanted to mention the other buzzword that's been going around, in the world, which is, COVID-19, and how it really struck the education system unexpectedly. And so a lot of things have been changing. And with this new school year coming in, we're going to be having schools, and students coming back into the schools face to face, or some still doing virtual. I know they're trying to push face to face. What are the next steps we think that we should take as a whole to reimagine education in a better light?
Yeah, there are a lot of ways, right? And I'm not even going to front and say, I understand what teachers are going through, like while teaching in a pandemic. Like that is something that I will always sympathize with our educators and our parents too, that had to take the role of becoming their child's instructor, and family members that had to, fill in. So I will always just say, like, you all deserve all the grace and seriously, like all the accolades for, surviving and really just tolerating this pandemic. And we're still in it. So like, let's just be very clear about that too. There are a lot of unknowns. However, moving into the school year where we are noticing that there are going to be significant amount of school reopenings, and for the most part, most kids will be in school in person. But let's just be, let's acknowledge the fact that virtual learning did work for some students, right? Maybe they weren't getting the access to the educational opportunities that they wanted in their schools, in their traditional school system. So this time, like that, maybe their families were able to find another opportunity that was a better fit for their kids, and they're succeeding. So I do think like that option should exist for some families, because there is some data out there that students are doing very well. And if they want that option, we should give them that option. But I also think when we're talking about for the greater majority that will be going back to school, it's important that we think about, like curriculum, like that's a conversation that's ongoing, as we know. And, how are we making sure, like I said earlier, how are we making sure that this curriculum is relevant to our students, it's meeting them where they're at, and it's also just like thinking of like, how are we preparing them to be better, like engaged citizens? Like when we think about what is the purpose for education, I guarantee you we cannot come to a consensus because it's all over the place. We don't really have an idea of what the purpose of education is. So we're just kind of trying and doing everything all at once and seeing what works. And that's not consistent. And our kids need consistency. They deserve that, because then when you think about who's coming into the workforce, these are going to be the same kids that did not get access to equitable opportunities, that did not get access to culturally relevant curricula that would help them become, like I said, more civically engaged citizens of our societies. And we are going to unfortunately have to bear those repercussions, right? So right now, I think we should, parents and family members, school district administrators and teachers, I think we should be paying attention to like, how are we showing up for our students in a meaningful way? Like they've gone through a lot. Our families have gone through a lot. Our teachers have gone through a lot. But I also believe at the end of the day, like, students are going to be, we have to be accountable to them. They have missed out on a lot, and we need to understand, like, okay, socially and emotionally, like, they are struggling. They have told you that, like, they voiced that. And if you really try and understand what they're saying, like, if you care to listen, they'll tell you what they need. They'll tell you, like, what's working and what's not working. And so I do think we should do a better job of centering students around our work as much as we can. And it shouldn't just be adults bickering at one another and, passing legislation without really centering it around the students and the families. They've always been the key stakeholders in the education system, but they haven't been treated that way, unfortunately. And I think we should take a really good look of, like, what it looks like to center our policies around that, and to make sure that we're valuing their voices when they're coming to meetings, and we're not, judging based off our preconceived notion of what a parent should look like when they come into the building. No, none of that matters. At the end of the day, they're showing up for their kids, and just take that into consideration, and honestly, just, like, hear them out and really incorporate their feedback, and not just like, oh yeah, we got it. We got it from now. Like, you can go back to what you were doing. No, like, they were very involved. So I hope that parents will continue to stay involved. Just because you're not, your child's primary instructor from, the first 8 hours of the day doesn't mean that you can take a hands-off approach. It's like, no, stay engaged. Like, right. Make sure you're questioning as much as you can, work collaboratively with the teachers, with the school leaders, and really just, once again, center everything that you do around the students.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Mimi, for this. This was great. We've talked a lot just about Black leaders and the role in leadership roles in education, just racial justice and activism and education equity. It's been a great conversation, and I'm so glad that you got a chance to be on the EdYOUcate podcast, and we look forward to doing more podcasts with you. You have just completed the most recent episode of the EdYOUcate podcast. Thank you for listening to the most fired up educational podcast out. Tune in every first Wednesday of each month at 5 p.m. during the 2021 through 2022 academic year.